A very warm welcome to everyone that's joining us today for this Diploma in International Financial Reporting Infocus webinar. Now, my name is Kritika and I'm a Digital Education Delivery Lead here at ACCA. Our session today is quite aptly titled Make Your Marks, Quick Wins and Study Strategies. The plan is that in the next hour and a half, you'll learn how to secure marks in the exam using smart exam techniques and focused practice. I'm really delighted to be joined today by Jane Howson. She is our expert tutor, and I'll be handing over to her very shortly, but just before I do, I want to briefly run through some housekeeping items. Now, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there are several buttons that you can click on. So firstly, there's the help icon, and this provides resources and information to help you resolve any technical glitches that you might experience through this webinar. Now, there's also icons for the slides and the media player, and you will need to see both of these during the webinar, so please make sure you have these selected. You can, of course, rearrange your screen to suit your preference and resize the windows if you need. Now, if at any point you can't hear what we're saying or you can't see any of the visuals, please do just refresh your browser, as that usually tends to solve the issue. There's also a Q&A button, and you should use this to submit the questions that you might like to have answered during the webinar. Now, we have a dedicated team working behind the scenes, and they're committed to helping deal with as many of the questions as possible. But I do just want to say that given the volume of questions that we receive in these live webinars, we can't always guarantee responding to everyone directly. But that said, we do have time allotted towards the end of this webinar where we will be taking your questions live. And we really hope that in this Q&A segment, we'll be able to offer responses that will be helpful to everyone. Now, all the resources that are relevant for today's webinar are accessible via that resources icon, and hopefully that's flashing on your screen right now. We would strongly encourage you to explore these resources in your own time. Now, on the right-hand side, you'll also notice there's an attendee chat function icon, and this will allow you to have conversations with your fellow peers attending this webinar. But we do encourage that if you've got questions, please post this in the Q&A functionality, because it could quite easily be missed in the chat. Now, registering for this webinar also means that you will be sent an email tomorrow detailing how you could listen to it again. So please don't worry if you miss something or you've got a technical issue, you can access the recording. And we do also upload our webinars to our Student Study Resources YouTube channel. So please do subscribe if you haven't already. Now, on that note, I'm going to hand over to Jane to take you through the content of this webinar. So over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Kritika. Hello, everybody. My name is Jane Howson, as we've already mentioned. And what I'm going to do today is try and encourage you to gain more marks in your exam. So a little bit of background about me. I'm a qualified chartered accountant. I qualified with what is now PricewaterhouseCoopers, but was Coopers & Lybrand back in the day. And I worked in audit for a little while before moving into exam-based training, which I've been doing for a number of years. And I do actually teach and cover quite a few different topics. Now, I'm going to turn my camera off, not because I'm trying to be unsociable, but I just think that sometimes the broadband width in some areas can be a little bit dodgy. So I just want to make sure that you're going to get the best experience as we go through. Now, what we're going to have a look at today, we're going to start, first of all, by looking at some key insights from the latest examiner's report. And every sitting after the exam's been sat, the examiner writes some really helpful tips about things that students have got right and things that students have got wrong. And I'm just going to highlight some of those key issues just to make sure that we can reinforce those points. We've also had, and you will see this on the ACCA website, there is a little link to a report called Read the Mind of the Marker. And I've got some extracts from that, which I would advise you to read through fully, but maybe we can have a little look through some of those points just to see how the marker marks your paper. Remember, the marker is your friend in an exam. We want to try and get them to give you marks. We're also going to show you how we can maximize your time and do some exam practice. And I'm going to show you where we can find some extra exams for you to work through. And then at the end, we've got a little summary where maybe we'll consider what you're going to cover over the next 2 or 3 weeks to get you ready for the big day itself. And at the end, as Kratika's already said, we'll take some live questions and answers. Obviously not on the microphone, but if you can pop those in the chat box, we will then pick those up. Now, let's have a quick reminder of the format of the paper. It's always going to be a good start, isn't it? So this paper is a 3-hour and 15-minute computer-based assessment. Now, usually we would recommend that the paper is probably about 3 hours, but 15 minutes gives you time to read through, because there's quite a lot that you can read through in here. There are 4 compulsory questions, and these 4 compulsory questions are worth 25 marks each. You don't have to do them in order. There is a little function on the software which allows you to do the questions in any order, but you do have to do all 4. And they usually follow a set format. First of all, we have question number 1, purely computation. It is a preparation of some consolidated financial statements. You will either be asked to prepare a consolidated statement of profit or loss, or a consolidated statement of financial position. And the examiner makes it really clear in the instructions that he doesn't want any chit-chat about what you're doing. All they want is some financial statements. And these financial statements will be prepared on a spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet will be, the format of it, it's very similar to using Excel, really, which you might use in the workplace, but slightly different, but the same sort of functions. Now, when you're doing calculations, I can see we've got a question already through here, is do we put the calculations in parentheses, or is it enough to put the calculations in the cell? Now, I think what you mean by that is when we're doing the preparation of financial statements, do we have to show our workings as on the side, or can we just put the numbers in the cell and use the formula from the spreadsheet to create the workings? I would recommend both, to be honest. I think the examiner does have the ability to click on the cells in the spreadsheet, but it's always useful for them to see a little working at the side to find out how you've come up with those notes. The next question is a question number 2, which has got some financial reporting issues and some ethics. So the financial reporting issues will be a manager or senior to you, maybe a director or a partner, has told you to account for some transactions in a certain way, and there's going to be some errors in there, and you're going to have to explain how they should be accounted for. There will be an ethical angle to that as well. So maybe the director or manager or partner has told you to prepare accounts in a certain way because they want to try and present the business in the best light possible. Maybe for shareholders, maybe to get a bonus themselves. And you're going to discuss all the financial reporting issues, and then you're going to discuss what the ethical implications are and state the actions. Questions number 3 and 4 are both on financial reporting issues. Slight difference between the two in that question number 3 tends to concentrate on international financial reporting standards, and question 4 often has some more up-to-date issues that the examiner might want you to discuss. Now, questions 2 and 3 have both discursive and numerical elements, which means that the discursive elements are going to be where you're going to be preparing answers in a Word document, so you're going to discuss them, and the numerical elements can be prepared on a spreadsheet. You'll then get question number 4, which has no numbers in it at all. It is purely discursive. So the exam paper itself is really trying to demonstrate that you know how to prepare financial statements, but also you can explain to somebody, perhaps more junior or more senior, what you're doing and why you're preparing the accounts in the way that you are. Now, let's have a look at our examiner's comment. So what have they been saying? Well, let's start, first of all, by looking at question number 1. Now, the examiner has said that on the paper itself, this is what students tend to answer the best. This is the strongest one. And we sometimes find that students spend too much time on this question, probably because there's some comfort in here. But remember, it only makes up 25% of your marks. So even if you get it absolutely perfectly right, you're not going to pass the paper because the pass mark is 50%. Now, the examiner has said, though, that the main issue with it is a lack of clear working. So going back to the point that we made before, although the examiner can click on a cell where you have a number on your spreadsheet, it's always best to put in brackets at the side where that number's come from, just to explain where you're getting the figures from. You can get part marks for a partly correct answer. But if the examiner can't see where your numbers come from, you'll get absolutely nothing. So what are we going to do? Well, what we have to do is to demonstrate some understanding by putting these workings through. And as we just said, there will be partial credit given. So even if there are 3 marks, let's say, for the calculation of goodwill, you could get 2 marks, even if the number's wrong, because you've demonstrated some understanding and some of the figures are correct. Now, I've sort of clumped together things that come up in questions 2, 3, and 4. So remember, questions 2 and 3 are a mix of numbers and words, and question 4 is purely discursive. Now, one thing that the examiner has been quite grumpy about, really, over the last few sittings is the lack of explanation. What students are really good at is putting down the numbers, calculating the figures that should go into the financial statements, and even preparing journals to show where corrections need to be made. But their main grumpiness was all about the fact that the question would have asked for some explanations, and the explanations were simply not given. And in the last few sittings, there has been some improvement. However, the examiner has said, though, that some of the explanations lack depth and focus. In other words, there's not enough there to explain why the calculation has been done. And sometimes what the students are doing is simply regurgitating facts from the International Accounting Standards or International Financial Reporting Standards. So what they're saying is, basically, here's the numbers and this is what the standard says. Well, that doesn't link why your numbers are being prepared in the way that the examiner is asking. So what you have to do in the question, read the scenario and the requirements carefully. Make sure that you've picked up everything the examiner wants you to discuss and calculate. Now, that is particularly important in question number 4, because in question number 4, they'll often give a requirement with several things that they want you to answer. So it's important that you've picked up everything. Then what you're going to do is to refer to the relevant International Financial Reporting Accounting Standard. And what you're going to do in here is to say, well, you've asked me to calculate what the number needs to be. Let me tell you what the standard says. It doesn't need to be word for word perfect, because this is not an open book exam. You've not got the standards in front of you. But what you do need to do is to make sure that you've got the essence of what the standard says on how to deal with a particular transaction. And then, very importantly, you're going to apply that scenario or apply that knowledge to the scenario. Now, do not give any information about the accounting standard that's not relevant. So I'll give you a classic example. If you get a question that asks you to talk about revenue recognition, we probably all know that there are 5 steps when we're calculating revenue. Sometimes the exam question will concentrate on one element of those 5 steps. Maybe it's about calculating the transaction price, step number 3. What the examiner does not want you to do is to list down all the 5 steps and give a huge amount of detail about what those mean when the question only wants you to talk about step number 3 on the calculation of the transaction price. What you're doing by putting down irrelevant information is wasting time when you could be getting marks elsewhere. So try and keep it brief, but make sure that it's accurate. And what we want you to do is to explain and show. Now, the examiner has said when there's numbers and words, easy marks were missed by failure to fully describe the presentational requirements. So in other words, you're wasting time by giving irrelevant information and not showing what the examiner actually wants. Now, if you're agreeing with me at this point, feel free to give me some thumbs up. That would be absolutely great. And keep those questions coming. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about a little bit is ethics. Now, the point about ethics is that this always comes into question number 2. And we have to remember that ethics is a really important aspect of being an accountant. People expect us to act in an ethical way. So it's only right that the exam question itself will ask us something about ethical issues. Now, question number 2 is normally looking at this from the relevant stakeholders' perspective. And we normally consider this to be shareholders. So if somebody is asking us to prepare financial statements in a manner that is not in accordance with accounting standards and would then show some lack of objectivity or lack of integrity, we've got to make sure that we pull this out. Now, in question number 2, 25 marks, there are a maximum of 5 marks available. Often it is about 5 marks that they're giving. Now, what the examiner has said in terms of issues associated with this is some students are simply reproducing the content of the ethical guide and not linking it in any way to the context of the scenario. Now, what they basically mean is we all know what the 5 elements of the ethical code are. We have to show integrity, which is being honest. We have to show objectivity, which means lacking bias, being neutral. We have to show professional competence and due care. In other words, we have to prepare financial statements in accordance with standards, and we should never take on any work that we are not competent to do. We have to show professional behaviour. Anything that we do that would discredit the ACCA is wrong. And finally, we have to make sure that we are keeping information confidential. We do not discuss things that are relevant to the business that we work within. We do not discuss that outside work. Now, sometimes you'll find that not all of those 5 elements are relevant. Often in recent exam questions, the examiner has mentioned in particular, oh, you decided that you were going to discuss it with your friend, the qualified accountant who works outside the business. So you can then discuss confidentiality. You may find that your boss has been telling you to prepare financial statements that doesn't agree with any international financial reporting standards. You call out the fact that that lacks integrity, objectivity, and professional due care and competence. So what the examiner is wanting is not just a list. They want you to actually state which element of the code has been breached and why, from the scenario, you think that is the case. Now, the other reason that the examiner gets a little grumpy is because some students just do not answer that at all. And that has got to be one of the easiest 5 marks on the paper. So remember, you don't answer the question, you don't get any marks at all. So put something down. Now, some of you might not be familiar with how the CBE, the computer-based assessment, works. And there's a really useful guide on the ACCA website that explains to you how the CBE works. And I would always spend a little bit of time playing around with that. The guide to CPE is really easy to follow. It takes you through step by step how you can play, what all the different buttons mean on the spreadsheet, what the functions are, and also what the functions are on the Word document. Now, a couple of things to make sure that we can be aware of. The guide takes you through the workspace view. So it shows you little extracts of what you see on a screen. It then lists the different buttons with the workspace functionality and takes you through what all of those mean. It does this for the word processor response functions, very similar to how you probably deal with Word. The icons look very similar. The one thing that we do need to be aware of, though, is that although the spreadsheet response options are also very similar to what you've probably come across when you do Excel, you will probably only use the addition and multiplication and subtraction functions. You're not going to use all the higher level functions in this paper. One thing that I will make you aware of, though, is the inability to insert a line on a spreadsheet function. And unless you're used to that, and unless you've recognized that before you go into the spreadsheet function, don't find that out the first time when you open up the exam paper itself. Just make sure that you are used to setting out and presenting information on a spreadsheet that takes that into account. Now, a final thought that we've got down here. I've just put this down as a final thought, and I've highlighted in pink and blue here what the examiner has said. This is a direct extract from their examiner's report. It says, when a spreadsheet is provided in addition to the word processing response area for questions 2 and 3, this is to assist candidates with the computational components of these questions. The same principles of using the spreadsheet functionality and showing adequate workings therefore apply to questions 2 and 3. So question 4, you only get a word processor function because you don't have any numbers in question 4. But for 2 and 3, we have both. Now, it means that when you're doing the spreadsheet function, if you want the marker to mark your workings on the spreadsheet function, please label your workings. Some students use the spreadsheet function apparently as just like a list of numbers all over the place. And then they calculate these numbers with no description whatsoever and put the number straight into the Word document and go, the answer is this. The poor examiner has no idea where that number's come from and how you've calculated it and what your thought process is. So when you use the spreadsheet function from the numbers, please explain what you're trying to do by labeling your workings, even though the examiner can click in the cell and see what your number is all about. Now, it's really useful then to put the description, do the narrative in the Word document, and then cross-reference any calculation that you come up with, the solution of it, to your workings in the spreadsheet function. Now, what they've said, and I've highlighted this in blue, is they don't like you using the spreadsheet function for the narrative. And I'll tell you why. When you do the spreadsheet function, you can have columns from A up to ZZZ. They just go straight across the page. The poor marker, when you do your written answers and you start writing out your sentences, your written answer will go right across the page, right across to ZZZ. And the examiner, when they've got the screen up in front of them, can only see a certain screenshot. And they've got to screen across. They've got to keep going across to find out where your answer ends. And it makes it really tiring to read. And something could be missed. So what I would strongly recommend, and what the examiner is begging students to do, is to use the word processor function for any narrative, just to make it nice and easy, and put the numbers in the spreadsheet function and copy them across. And it even says down here, if you want to, you can just use the word function. If you want to, there is a calculator on there. You don't have to use spreadsheets if you don't want to. So that's what the examiner has been saying. Let's see what our markers look at. Now, obviously the markers follow the instructions of the examiner. And what we want to do here is to try and think about what the markers think. Now, I've shortened this here to RTMM, read. This is sort of reading through the markers description here. So it's reading the mind of the marker. And what the examiner asked the marker to come up with, so you've got a little document somewhere on the ACCA website that asks you to go into here, and you can click through the ACCA website and you'll find the full text of this document. Now, the first thing that the examiner's done is basically gone through question number 1 and has given you the answer to two different candidates' answers to show you where the difference is. These are questions from the June 2024 published exam. And the examiner would suggested that you probably bring up on the CBE platform the June 2024 exam, look through that, familiarise yourself with the question, and then you can have a little look through these discussions. But I'm going to talk you through this as if we're looking at it from what the marker is trying to pick out. Now, what I've highlighted up here is the requirements. And I did say to you before that the examiner has said that students just aren't following the requirements sometimes. And you can see that this is a very typical requirement for question number 1. They give you a list of exhibits. The first one is the individual financial statements of each company. Then they'll give you some background information, which will be exhibit number 2. And then exhibits 3, 4, and 5 in this instance were different adjustments, different little transactions that maybe the partner, that the parent company didn't get right, or maybe they're things that you need to do some corrections for, like some provisions for unrealized profits or some intercompany trading. Now, the examiner has told you they want you to use the pre-populated spreadsheet. And in the pre-populated spreadsheet, the examiner will give you those exhibit number 1 financial statements again. And they're there so that you can use them as part of your workings. But then there are these little notes at the bottom. And it says, I don't want any written explanations. So writing paragraphs about why you've corrected things in the way that you have will gain no marks and waste time. Unless specifically referred to, do not consider deferred tax. Now, for some of these, there will be some deferred tax on things like fair value adjustments, but it's basically saying, if the examiner says, please don't talk to me about deferred tax, or doesn't say anything at all, don't start calculating deferred tax. You're wasting time on that. So usually they just want you to do deferred tax on fair value adjustment. So that's all you do. You should also show all of your workings to the nearest 1,000. Now, when you get these financial statements, they are often given to you in thousands. Do be very careful when you're reading through the exhibits that sometimes they are described in millions or to the nearest dollar. So just make sure that you get your noughts absolutely right. Now, let me explain what the examiner or the marker has actually said. This question was a consolidated statement of financial position. And when they're awarding marks, when you are aggregating, you are adding the parent and the subsidiary together, what you're going to do is get a half mark. So knowing that the parent and 100% of the subsidiary for statement of financial position is added together for PPE, inventory, receivables, payables, bank and cash will get you half a mark for each one. How easy is this? Where you've got to do some calculations, maybe you've got to come up with a goodwill calculation, you've got to adjust the retained earnings, maybe you've got to come up with a calculation for the non-controlling interest. Those are going to attract more marks. They could be attracting 5 marks, 3 marks, 2 marks. You'll know that the more you've got to do, the more marks that are available. So remember, if you take a number out of the question, and put it in the right place, as a very general rule, you're going to get a half mark. If you take a number and you have to tweak it, you have to adjust it to get the right figure, that's going to start attracting 1 mark, 1.5 marks, 2 marks, depending on how complicated it is. Now, let me show you what a marker would see. So you've submitted your statements of financial position, and we can see down here that we've taken the individual subsidiary ones. So we've got alpha and beta, the parent's alpha, the subsidiary's beta. And then we've got a column of adjustments before they've added up to get the consolidated statement of financial position. Fabulous presentation. What you've done here is you can see that the 500 and the 260 would then get a half mark for aggregation. And the 9,000 here is referred to working number 1, which really helps the marker. That 9,000 is then a fair value adjustment. And that fair value adjustment gets you another half mark because you've adjusted that PPE for a number that's relevant. So that first line there would have got 1 mark. Note number 2 with the 24,000 is where there's an internally developed brand. And in the candidate's answer, they did a net asset working on there, and that net asset working then showed that we are introducing an internally developed brand, and from taking it from the net asset working and popping it into the statement of financial position in the right place, got another half mark. With the inventories in here, you can see we've got an addition of the parent and the sub, gets a half mark. And then for attempting a provision for unrealized profit is another half. Now, if you then got that provision for unrealized profit right, you could then get more marks added to that. So in this example, we've awarded 1 mark at that point, but you would have got more marks for the calculation as well. The trade receivables and the cash equivalent, notes number 4 and 5, are simply adding together with no adjustments. They get half mark each. So you can see here that we've got 1.5, 2.5, 3.5 marks here just for adding and putting through some very simple calculations. Now, what I've done down here is I've explained to you where these marks are coming from and explain why. So marks for adding, marks for adjusting is what we've got here. Now, moving on, we then went to look at the equity or the bottom half of the financial statements. And in here, we can see that we've got the equity and liabilities section. Now, the workings for retained earnings, other components of equity, and non-controlling interest are all beautifully cross-referenced for the marker, and the marks would have been allocated against the side of those workings. And what I've done underneath is just given you an example of the non-controlling interest working. So notice there's no marks on the statement of financial position, but all the marks are given in the workings. The examiner has given a half mark on line 20 for putting in the share capital of the parent only. Then in the non-controlling interest working, they've gone to working number 6, and they've given, first of all, a half mark for using the correct non-controlling interest percentage of 25%. But they've not awarded a half mark for the net asset working because that's not correct. When we look at the workings, that's not the right number. Then there's a half mark for using own figure from the post-acquisition share of the net asset working. So at line 30, there's a half mark for 25% and a follow-through mark for getting the right figures. And then at line 31, the allocation or the share of goodwill is absolutely incorrect. If anything, a non-controlling interest should have an impairment, so that didn't get any marks. So the total for the marks there would have been a half mark for row 29, or actually row 30 as well, a half mark again at row 30, and nothing at row 31. So there was about 1 mark out of a possible 2 for that. The importance of showing workings helps the marker. Now let's think about how you can maximize your exam practice. Now, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is that you work through past exam questions. When you go onto the CBE platform, you'll see that there are past exam questions that you can then practice. And once you've submitted those, you can actually download the answers to those questions too. And all of the statement of financial position, statement of profit or loss that have been prepared on the platform would be really useful for you so that you can then practice to time and get used to that CBE format. Now, these questions are important, and there's also going to be a mock. Now, let me explain to you a little bit about the mock. The mock has now been released. It was released a little over a week ago, and there's also a mock debrief available. So once you've attempted that mock, you will then be able to go through the mock with a tutor, in fact, it's me, to make sure that you're happy with where that's come from. The mock is exam standard. It's exam style. It is something that can be achieved in 3 hours and 15 minutes, and you have the ability to practice that on the platform with all of the functionality that you're going to get in the real exam. You may find that when you attempt this, you're really, really pressured for time. But what this is going to teach you to do is to manage your 3 hours, 15 minutes, and try and do your 4 questions in that time. So allowing for about 15 minutes reading time, your 3 hours divided by your 4 questions that are of equal marks means that you should be attempting each question in 45 minutes. Allowing for about 5, little under 5 maybe, minutes reading time for each one, you need to set the clock when you practice that mock and make sure that you complete the questions in the time available. Don't fall down the rabbit hole of just doing question 1 in the time available and part of question 2. Remember, you have got to attempt all questions to have the best chance of passing. What this will always do as well is that it will highlight the elements of the syllabus that you're actually really good on at the moment. It will highlight the areas which you understand. And what it will also do is identify any topics that you might feel a little uncertain about. So this is not going to be something that you can use to worry about. It's not there to be worried. It's part of the learning exercise. And the importance of doing the mock is really to make sure that at this stage, you know where you are. Would strongly recommend that if you haven't sat this now, you sit this in the next few weeks. So as far as I understand, the paper is out there and the debrief should be being released by today, certainly by Monday morning. It will be up there ready for you to go through your mock. So do the mock first, then spend some time going through the debrief. Now, I've said down here that the debrief should be available by the 17th. The real exam, remember, is on the 5th of December. I don't think it is a Monday. What we've got down here is a little calendar. I think it's a Friday. Most of you are going to be sitting that on that Friday. So what we want to think about now is how we're going to use the time that we've got available between now and the exam in the best way that we possibly can. Now, what we've got on the ACCA website are some really useful resources. I'm sure that you've been looking at these already. And I have mentioned to you the fact that we've got this CBE document that explains how it's worked. If you've not looked at that, you absolutely need to look at that very, very soon. But what we've also got on the website, and these got some technical articles, and these have been written by the examining team. And so what they're doing is highlighting some key issues that you should be aware of. I would strongly recommend that you look at the full text. When you look at these, you can just open them up They click on them, you get a PDF document on there, and they are highlighting what the examiner is looking for. They're really useful things. And I've got 3 down here that I'm just going to run through. Now, I can see on the chat that we've got some questions about IFRS 18, and will that be part of the question number 1? So I'm really hoping that this is going to answer this question here. So it says, where the statement of profit or loss or extracts are included as part of any question, these will be based on the new IFRS 18 pro formas. Now, IFRS 18 has been introduced into the December paper. What it does is replace IAS 1, which used to explain to us how financial statements are presented. And there's some new sort of templates, if you like, for the statement of profit or loss. There is more emphasis on certain profit figures in the statement of profit or loss. Now, in answer to a question that we've got down here, any pre-populated templates used in question 1 will be in the new format. So it's not a case of you having to learn it. Hopefully, if they get a statement of profit or loss, when you get the background information on question number 1, that will give you the 2 individual companies, the parent and the sub, that will be in the new format. Any pre-populated spreadsheets will also be in the new format. So you don't have to worry too much about learning that. That should be given to you. Candidates will be expected to include any new statement of profit or loss line items into the correct category of the statement of profit or loss. So have a read through this article because it does give you some background. Now, for questions 2, 3, and 4, it says, in the past, we've expected answers simply to state that this will be recognised as an income expense in the profit or loss. Notice that the examiner is now expecting answers to specify the correct category in order to obtain full credit. Now, there's an example down here. This will be recognised in the investing category of statement of profit or loss, or this will be recognised as an operating expense in the statement of profit or loss. Now, in the past, what the examiner is quite keen on is when they've asked for a correct accounting treatment, they don't just want the numbers. What they want to know is where you're going to put that number. And what they've never wanted is in the profit or loss or in the statement of financial position. What they've always wanted is as an expense or as income. What they're now saying is I want to know where as an expense or where as income that's going to go. For a statement of financial position, it's still absolutely fine to highlight that this will be a non-current asset or a current asset or a non-current liability or a current liability. They want you to be very clear on where things go. Now it says, where a question requires explanations regarding the suggested accounting treatment proposed, candidates may need to identify items in the statement of profit or loss which have not been accounted for correctly. So I'm really hoping I've answered those questions in the chat here that we're talking about IFRS 18. Now, notice down here as well, it says this could include items being misclassified or errors relating to over-aggregation and offsetting. In other words, where you've got people who've prepared financial statements and they've added too much together. They've not shown the detail in the financial statements. Now, another article we've got, again, a topic that is very, very important these days, is about sustainability. Now, there's lots of information about sustainability. There's a very detailed article here. I'm sure you've heard about sustainability. I'm sure that we can all quote what sustainability means. It means about not exhausting resources at the moment, which is then going to compromise those available for people in the future. But it's not just about defining sustainability here. What we've got to do is we've got to try and explain how we're moving towards financial reporting in this area. Now, there are 2 learning outcomes. And again, I've taken this straight out of the article on sustainability, so feel free to read the full article. It says, given the nature of the 2 learning outcomes in the DipIFR syllabus, It is possible to envisage the inclusion of questions which might contain one or more of the following elements. You might be asked to come up with a discussion of the establishment of the International Sustainability Standards Board and its place alongside the International Accounting Standards Board under the oversight of the Foundation. It could include an appreciation of how the need for the standards has arisen. To me, that sounds like a pretty typical question number 4. I'm not tipping that that's going to come up, but usually this sort of discussion is a discussion number 4. Now, we have to understand that the ISSB has produced 2 disclosure standards, IFRS S1 and IFRS S2. These are mentioned down here, and the disclosure standards are about how we recognize risks and opportunities for sustainability issues and risks and opportunities relating to climate change issues. Now, the discussion of the extent to which the compliance could be mandated are also a discussion area. At the moment, these standards are not compulsory, and that's because it's really hard to make them compulsory in an international platform when not every single country has taken climate change and sustainability on board. When that happens, I'm sure these are going to become mandatory. So at the moment, it's good practice to follow these, but not mandatory. And there could be an outline of the scope, objectives, and core content of the 2 disclosure standards. Now, it's not that you're going to have to quote word for word. You just need to make sure that you understand what's in them. So IFRS S1 is about sustainability related issues, opportunities and disclosures. What is the business doing about them? IFRS S2 is about the climate related ones. And again, it's important to understand the different types of risk. They talk about physical risk from things like where you've got rising sea levels and you've got adverse weather conditions, to transitional risk, which is the risk associated with us moving towards, let's say, solar power or more battery-operated vehicles. Now, the scenarios may include references, it says down here. For example, we may need to impair an asset because of climate change, making it redundant. But the examination of the standards themselves is restricted to the scope of the learning outcomes. So I would really read through that technical article there to make sure that you are aware of the issues associated with that. Now, the last one I'm going to talk about is ethics. I know I keep coming back to ethics here, but remember, we've got up to 5 marks available in question number 2 for ethics. Now, there is a whole article on this, and it says, it explains that we've been examining this since 2021, and the candidates need to know that they are familiar with the relevant paragraphs of the code. But not every exam scenario will require identification of all 5 fundamental principles or all of the above threats, and the candidates must tailor their answer accordingly. Now, again, that article is really useful for you to have a little read through. It will emphasize what I've been talking about in terms of what needs to go into the question that we mentioned before. So what are you going to do over the next 2 or 3 weeks? Well, number 1 is not panic. I think what we have to do here, we've got lots of time. What we want to try and break this down into, I called it a 2 to 3 week study plan, because obviously you're going to be doing your exam on the 5th, which is a Friday. And I suspect in the run up to the exam, some of you may have some time available. Some of you may be working before that. So I don't want to overburden you with lots of things that you need to do, but I just want to try and think about what we should be sort of covering in the next 3 weeks. Now, I'm starting with today, and I'm going right up to the 5th of December. And I would recommend you're probably going to be looking at trying to find at least 10 to 15 hours of study time. That's an hour or 2 in the evenings, most evenings, maybe a day at the weekends. Let's try and make sure that we build in a little bit of rest as well. I don't want you to stress too much. And we all know that we have things we need to do outside work. So just make sure that when you are studying, the time that you set aside is constructive. So what we need to do here is to make sure that we've got a good use of time, and the time that we're spending is a good amount of time. So what I want you to do and make sure that you've covered is let's get all of the learning knocked on the head. So what we need to do is to go through any learning areas that you're not really aware of, quick flick through your revision notes, make sure that you're happy with the technical detail, maybe go through some questions that you've got in various question banks that you might have had from tuition or tuition resources. Make sure that you read these articles. Now, I've picked out 3 that you might want to go through. I think that the sustainability and the IFRS 18 are really, really important for this exam. And I would strongly recommend that if you haven't looked at those are going to be 2 important things to look through. And if you haven't gone on to the CBE yet and you're not familiar with the platform, now is your chance to do that. So maybe practice some questions or some illustrations that you've been working through. Just practice those on the software. Now, I'm expecting you to get that done probably in the next couple of days would be good. Then we're going to have a look at week 2. Now, I think you need to be looking at the debrief, mock with the debriefs. This is going to be next week. Do the mock. Try to do it without looking at your notes if you possibly can. That'll give you a good opportunity to see where you are, and then go through the debrief. The debrief talks you through how to approach the questions and what you should have done. I would strongly recommend that you have looked at the model answers and worked through the answers yourself before you look at the debrief. Then we want to go through the most recent exam questions. Go to the platform, start with the June 2025, go back to December 25, June 24, December 23, etc. Work back and practice those questions. I would practice questions. I would do a whole paper, because then you're looking at all types of questions, a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4. I wouldn't just practice question 1 and then look at question 2, because I think if you do that, you'll run out of time and you might never get to look at some question 4s. So look at them as going through past exam questions would be my recommendation. And note any topics that you thought you understood, but you didn't. When you've sort of gone through the questions and you haven't quite worked out what they are, go back to your notes and make sure that you're happy with what you've learnt, and use these as a learning exercise as well. In the final week, I don't want you working too hard. I think the exam itself is going to be quite draining, but probably give yourself a chance to maybe look at a couple of other little teeny tiny questions that you might not have looked at yet. Keep working steadily. Don't be learning things you've not looked at before at this stage. You should be picking up all the technical issues in the next week, and don't consider not studying the night before the exam. I always say that because I just think you need a really good night's rest. Maybe just look over some notes on things you're a little bit unsure of, or maybe just recap those technical articles again to make sure that you're happy with IFRS 18 and sustainability. And remember, look after yourself. Try and get lots of rest and eat well. I know that sounds really silly, but just try to make sure that you keep on top of daily routines, because that's going to help you think and function on the day itself. Now, I'm hoping you found that useful. I can see that I've had lots of questions coming through here. So I think probably the sensible thing is to try and answer some of these questions that we've got already. Let's have a look. What have we got down here? I'm getting quite a few questions on the use of the spreadsheet and how that's used. So I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about some of these. I think some of you, again, aren't really very familiar, maybe, with some of the spreadsheet functions. So I've got one here that says, at the consolidation, if it's profit and loss, will it be in the new shape of IFRS 18? Well, I'm hoping that we've answered that one for you, Ahmed. So that one we've already covered. Here we've got a question that says, will the statement of financial position or statement of profit or loss be copied into the spreadsheet in the question? Absolutely. So what you'll find, and again, when you go through the mock debrief, Namin, you'll see the format of what the exam is, and you'll see exhibit number 1 is where you've got the question. So this is what you started with. And then in the spreadsheet, you've got a pre-populated spreadsheet, and what they've given you in Exhibit 1 is copied into that. So you've got all of that to play with. That will save you some time copying numbers across. It then says, Mohammed, you've said, can we just add all the numbers in one cell and mention the working beside? Absolutely. So put in brackets on your spreadsheet function. You can then put in what your working is. So you're going to say to the examiner, well, to work out the provision for unrealized profit function, what I've done is I've taken the transaction number here, and I've taken the transaction number, and then I'm going to multiply it by the markup or margin. So here's my answer. And then you can just put your formula in the cell and you can come up with that one. Another good question from Mark Red. He said, when answering the consolidation, can I answer in a horizontal way per column to the right, or should I answer as vertical? What I would say, and that's a really good question actually, spare a thought for the marker. The marker can often see what you can see on your platform. So you'll probably be able to see column A through to sort of column I, maybe column J, depending on whether you've extended the columns themselves. I would keep your statement of profit or loss or statement of financial position within those cells, within that range, and then put workings underneath. So in answer to your question, Ahmed, I would keep those vertical because I think that just helps the marker a lot. Let me see, what other questions have we got down here? We've got lots of questions on putting things in parentheses. I think we've already covered that for the responses. What else have we got here? I've got a quick question in here that says, which documents can you bring with you to attend the exam? This is not an open book exam. Just to remind you that you're not going to have any notes. You're not going to have any bits of paper. Everything will be provided. So you just bring your good self with your identification. I've also got a question here that's asking me about what do I think the statement of financial position or the statement of profit or loss will come up. I can't tip on that one. I don't know. I think the best thing that you can do is practice both. I do think that, Giab, that the consolidation adjustments, so things like provisions for unrealized profits and intercompany trading and fair value adjustments, and even the calculation of goodwill could come into both types of question. So you could be asked to calculate goodwill even with a statement of profit or loss. I think the best thing you can do is practice both. I would not like to tip at all. Right, what other questions have we got here? Ooh, let's have a look. Right. Actually, Marius, yeah, you've asked a really good question. You said, how different is IFRS 18 from IAS 1? Well, my friend, I think you probably need to have a little look at the article to see that. Generally, it's the presentation. So you calculating numbers are going to be very, very much the same as what you've done before. It is all about where you put them and the presentation. So that's really what it is. So it's really about learning the different subheadings and also understanding which category of expense an expense would go. But in terms of doing double entry, in terms of other transactions, they're going to be calculated in the same way. I've got a question here that says, is IFRS 19, will this come up in this exam? The examiner will only examine what's on the syllabus. And although IFRS 19 is sort of out there at the moment, an awareness might be useful of it, but it's not going to be tested in any great detail, I wouldn't have thought. If it's not on the syllabus, it's not going to be examined. Mustafa, you've said, why did the rate of success, why is it very low and it's under 50%? Well, my friend, I tell you, the reason that the pass rate's very low is several things, and this is what the examiner's been explaining. Many students do not practice questions to time, and the time management is awful. So if you do not attempt every single one of those 4 questions, your chances of success are low. And many students spend far too long on question 1 and question 2 and don't attempt the others. And that is why you don't get success. Equally, you'll get students who obviously just haven't had the time to do the technical understanding or learn the technical knowledge, but don't practice questions to understand the application and why that goes into, or how that goes into an exam. So if you want to pass, and I think anybody that actually practices a good number of questions and has a reasonable amount of technical understanding will pass this exam. It's all about application. That's the way that you pass. In terms of basic calculators, I've been asked here whether there's a basic calculator allowed into the exam. Basic calculators, I would say that there is one given to you in the exam and you have the spreadsheet. I don't think you need a calculator, but you'll see when you go onto the software, there is the option to click on the button, I believe, although the team from ACCA can confirm that. It should actually pop down for you. I believe that sometimes calculators can be taken in, but generally, I would say that you can rely on one in the exam that's given to you online. Another question. Can I answer question 2 and question 3 only in the spreadsheet, provided I present nicely, of course? Switching between Word and spreadsheet seems to take time. Hi, and I do agree with that. I think it does take time. The examiner has asked you not to. That's all I can recommend at this stage. I think as long as you are presenting it neatly, I mean, they can't, if you've done the work and you've answered correctly, you will get credit. All I'm saying is if you can try and help the marker in some way, that would be good. It's just going to be a case of cutting and pasting, really. So if you sort of put the numbers in and from the spreadsheet into your Word document and then type the words into the Word document, that should be fine. What you may find is practice this with a few questions, because you may find that when you start doing questions themselves, you on the platform, you get into the habit of doing the numbers on the spreadsheet, cutting and pasting and putting it in the Word document and then putting the words around it. So I think it's really a case of question practice. I say all I can say is that's what the examiner has asked us to do. Right then, Giab, you said, do you recommend the heading and sentences when answering the question to require the explanation? I'm assuming that you mean when we're looking at question 2 and 3 and 4. What I would recommend, I think what's quite good practice sometimes, is to cut and paste the requirement out of the question, out of the requirement, and put it in your Word document. And then you've got a heading for each bit. And it means that you then can answer the question fully. You can always delete that afterwards. I think if you're answering different sections of the question, like in question 2 and question 3 and question 4, where you have different elements that you need to answer, I would strongly recommend that you put a little heading at the top of the paragraph, because I think that really helps the marker understand what you're talking about. And it means you don't get mixed up in different elements. So I think that is a really good idea. Oh, Amma, you've said, what is the best way to save time in this exam? Well, I think there's a couple of things. As I keep mentioning, I think that the main thing that you can do, time will be against you. I think that the question paper is doable in 3 hours and 15 minutes, but you have to know where you'll go, how you're going to answer questions. So what I would suggest is that make sure that you know what a question 1, 2, 3, and 4 looks like. And then if you go through each one, you should then get quicker at answering the questions themselves. So if you know what the examiner is looking for, you should be able to answer the question quickly. Use the reading time. I think that would be good. And always have a little, almost like a clock, mental clock, keep an eye on the time in your exam. And once your 45 minutes plus a couple of minutes of reading time is over, move on to the next question. Because you can't really save time in the exam, but you can manage your time really well. Right, I'm going to take one more because I'm conscious of time. When do the past exams, is it better to do the most last exam from? Right. So, Tasnim, I think when you're practicing the exams, I would probably start with the more recent. Students sometimes say to me is if something came up in 2025, in June 2025, is it going to come up again in December? Now, again, I am not tipping. I don't know is the answer. I think there are questions or there are topics that can come up in any exam question, and there are topics that don't come up in every exam question. So to be best prepared, you need to know about every single one. So I don't think it does any harm in starting with the most recent paper and working backwards. And I think I probably would start with 25, then 24, then 23, then 22. But before you do any of those, Tasnim, I would always start with the mock. I think we've covered most of the questions. I think I'm very conscious of time. So I'm hoping that you found that useful. It's been lovely working with you today. I'm going to hand you back now to Katika to finish off the session.
Thank you so much, Jane. That was really, really informative, and it sort of brought back memories from my days of studying financial reporting. So thank you so much. As Jane has mentioned, we really hope that you found that useful and you've picked up some great tips along the way. And a recording of this session will be sent to you. I know quite a few of you mentioning in the chat and in the Q&A, will we get a recording of this? You absolutely will. Within the next 24 hours, you'll see it pop up in your inbox, but also look out for the upload on our Student Study Resources YouTube channel as well. So worthwhile subscribing to our channel if you haven't done so already. One more thing to sort of call out is the resources. So I'm just going to spotlight this again. So you should see that resources icon flashing. Some of you were asking about slides for today's session. We have PDF these slides and all the great information that Jane has put on these slides available via the resources. So be sure to check those out and all the other additional resources that are linked to this webinar as well. I suppose all that remains really is for me to say a very big thank you to you guys for joining the session today, to Jane for all the amazing support that she's been providing to you today, and a big shout out to the team helping behind the scenes to keep this session running smoothly. And the very best of luck for your exams. We do hope that you are successful. So that's a wrap for this session.